Welcome to the Learn at Lunch webinar series. These webinars are possible thanks to support from the Farm Service Agency. Today's speaker is Dr. Rodney Jones, and he will discuss farm business planning. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat box in the lower right corner, and Dr. Jones will answer them at the end of the webinar. For more information on this subject, you may visit the eFarm Management site. Dr. Jones, I'll turn it over to you now.
Welcome to our farm business planning webinar. What I want to do here is give a brief overview of what business planning is in general and a brief introduction to the various components that we would consider would be necessary to make up a comprehensive business plan, really for any entrepreneurial activity, but we want to focus a little more on perhaps the farm or ranching type business here today. Business planning means different things to different people. As a general statement, the meaning is much broader than just thinking about financial projections, which is a common misconception that's out there about business planning that I hear a lot. I hear that it's all about doing financial projections. That's certainly not the case. Today, that term really implies deeply thinking about all aspects of your business, what it takes to succeed, what your business brings to the table that will help it succeed. It's a very future-oriented process, because the issue is not so much what it takes to be successful today. If you're currently in business, especially in the business of agriculture, you probably have that figured out. Rather, the issue is what it will take to be successful well into the future. We operate in a competitive industry, so the competition is always getting better, and we must find some way to stay ahead of the curve. For most of us in commodity agriculture, that means being an efficient, low-cost producer, but there are certainly other strategies that might work as well. There are a number of well-documented benefits associated with formalizing the business planning thought process, even going to the level of developing a comprehensive written business plan. The various modules and exercises found in the web-based OSU Farm Business Management curriculum. The website's been listed down there in the chat box and will be referred to later as well. But the various modules and exercises found in that web-based resource provide all the necessary pieces to begin formulating a very comprehensive business plan for a farm or ranch operation. Working through that process will help the business management team to do all of the things that are listed here on this slide. Stimulate deep thinking about the future. Provide some structure to the decision-making process. Provide a better understanding of your business and the changes that it is facing. The business planning process, by definition, will involve digging up some information and helping to provide some benchmarks for your business. It'll help the business stakeholders to prioritize and clarify goals and objectives. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. It'll help the business management stakeholder team to test ideas on paper, which is quite often a lot cheaper way, a lot less expensive way to find out that some idea that you're kicking around might not in fact be quite as feasible as you would like it to be, then to actually go out there and invest significant amounts of money before finding out that the idea didn't have much of a chance to begin with. And the business planning process will help facilitate much needed communication and coordinate decisions among the stakeholder team. I would argue that it is that last point that is perhaps the most important benefit of developing a written business plan. The most rewarding aspect of the business planning process is facilitation of communication and better coordination of decisions. The planning process can't move forward without input from all stakeholders, and as such, the process will force that open and honest communication, and that's a good thing. I want to step back. I mentioned the word stakeholder. several different times. So I want to clarify what I mean by that term stakeholders in your business. By my definition, a stakeholder in an agricultural business involves anyone with a management role in the business, an ownership interest in the business, and the one that's often forgotten, particularly in family-based businesses like our agricultural businesses so often are, anyone with an emotional stake in the business, someone who grew up on that operation many, many years ago, but still has an emotional connection to the business. So managerial, ownership, and emotional stake in the business would be the categories that I would define as important stakeholders in your business. Those things that I mentioned on the previous slide were a little bit futuristic, a little bit long-term, a little hard to get a handle on, but there are some more tangible, almost immediate benefits of formalizing the business planning process, and those include assembling information in an easy to find format so that you can answer questions posed by various audiences, whether they be family members, lenders, landowners, etc. A formal business plan is a pretty impressive piece of work. It sends a signal of professionalism about your business to various potential audiences. We're not just doing it for others. There's a significant benefit in going through the planning process in that in and of itself will hone your decision-making skills. The ultimate goal, of course, is to zero in on what it is you and your business do or can do well, and how can you maintain that quote-unquote competitive advantage. Here's an example of a very broad outline of the things that need to be addressed in a comprehensive business plan. This is an outline that I use in my classes here on campus, for example. There's many subcomponents or further details that need to be filled in, and there are certainly other good outlines available in various places on the web, etc. But this example is broad enough that the specific details that are needed will pretty well fit in one of these broad categories, consisting of the ones listed on this slide: the executive summary, a good description of the business, a description of products and operations that the business is involved in, a sales and marketing plan, a management, organization, and staffing plan, a financial plan, and then a category that I call other that captures many of the other details that probably need to be thought about. Let's take a look at these components in just a little more detail, with the caveat that a comprehensive exploration of the entire business planning process would take much more time than we have to devote in this simple webinar. So this is just an exposure to the process. The executive summary is a concise summary of the whole plan. And since it could be the first, and in some cases the only component that some audiences will ever read or process, it is often considered, at least from that standpoint, to be the most important component of the overall business plan. However, with that said, if you're thinking that you can just put together an executive summary and skip the rest of the planning process, you're kind of kidding yourself, because the details have to be put together before the summary can be written. Think of the executive summary as the Shark Tank presentation of your business. Very quickly explain to any audience why you think this business will survive and thrive in the competitive world we operate in. We're all familiar, I think, with the dismal failure rate statistics for small businesses, agriculture not being immune to that phenomenon. Who are we? Why are we special? What need are we filling? What business environment are we operating in? What's the size and scope of the business that we're talking about or operating? And if we're needing to change, what kind of money are we talking about? And how will we manage the risk-reward trade-off, for example, are things that can be elaborated on just briefly in the executive summary. The description of your business is just what it sounds like. How did the business get to where it is today? What products and services do we provide, and why do we provide those products and services? Who is involved in your business from a management perspective, again, an ownership perspective, or who do we need to consider to be maybe some of those emotional stakeholders in the business? In the description, provide a detailed discussion of the resources that are currently managed or needed for future plans, etc. Don't just list the assets and their values like we have this tractor and it's worth X amount of money. That listing and valuing will certainly be done later in the financial section, but rather in this section, talk about what makes that resource valuable to the business. What's unique about this piece of land that we either own or have access to that contributes to our business, and how does that resource fit with what we're doing? Perhaps a discussion of what resources we need to acquire in order to move forward, and why do we think we need them? We need to make a good argument here before spending the large dollars that are required to acquire most of the assets that we use in agriculture. Do we have backup plans for the key resources of our business? What if the primary tractor breaks down? What if our cattle feeding equipment breaks down, or weather prevents us being able to get to certain herds of cattle that we're managing? How are we going to get our crops planted if things don't go well? Those are the kind of things that need to be discussed in the description or somewhere in the plan as we think about the physical resources that we're managing. The third big topic on the example outline that I laid out and utilize quite often is a discussion of the products that we produce and how we produce them. Talk about the products and the production process. Is there anything unique about how we're doing things? Are we producing a commodity like wheat or corn or just commodity beef cattle? Or are we involved in something a little bit unique that we can charge a higher price for? Do we have a scheduling plan clearly spelled out for how we're going to implement the production process? How do we assure the quality of the production process itself? For example, beef quality assurance, injection site management for livestock, for example. How do we track and verify what feed additives we're using, etc.? How are we controlling weeds so that we don't have a foreign matter problem in our wheat, for example? Do we have nutrient management plans in place? Animal waste control plans? All of this can be consolidated and discussed here in this section of a comprehensive business plan. Are we subject to any special licensing requirements? A simple one might be pesticide applicator licensing. How do we plan to maintain currency, etc.? What if things go wrong from a production standpoint? Drought, disease, etc. can all create production shortfalls. Have we thought about those things that could cause a production disruption and what we can do to minimize the impact of those disruptions? The fourth broad category that we laid out in the example business plan outline was the sales and marketing component. Nearly everyone you talk to will have a differing perception regarding what a commodity marketing plan involves and how successful time spent developing specific marketing strategies will be. At the very least, in the sales and marketing component of the business plan, there should be a discussion of individual marketing philosophy and what tools the stakeholder team is willing to use to manage market risk. Of course, if you're in the non-commodity business, the concept of a product marketing plan takes on an entirely different meaning, trying to develop a pricing strategy, a promotion strategy, etc. The important point I want to make here is that for most agricultural businesses, Marketing the business itself is every bit as crucial as marketing the products or services being produced. Being seen as the tenant of choice in the community, the borrower of choice by your lender, the employer of choice by potential employees, or just being perceived in the community as a good community citizen can be critical to the success of a modern agricultural business. These are the components of the marketing plan that are the most difficult, but perhaps the most critical. Marketing also pertains to product quality control. We talked earlier about quality of the production process. Related, there may be some things that can be done on the marketing side to assure that market premiums are being obtained, or at least discounts are being avoided. Finally, are there storage or inventory management issues that could be spelled out in a business plan, such as a serious, detailed evaluation of a proposed on-farm grain storage facility might be one that would fall in this category. The fifth broad category of issues that might be addressed in a comprehensive business plan would be management, organization, and staffing. This component of the business plan consists of many subcomponents. There are three very distinct yet related types of quote-unquote structure that need to be addressed in the overall business plan. One of those, financial structure, warrants a section of its own that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. The second component, legal entity structure, is an important consideration for business operation and management. Choices, of course, range across the spectrum from sole proprietorships, general partnerships, various types of limited partnerships, corporate type structures, and LLCs. Each have advantages and disadvantages relative to important criteria such as ability to raise capital, liability protection, management flexibility and control, facilitation of business continuity over time, how the business is taxed, legal filing requirements, and there are others. Business stakeholders need to carefully consider what is most important to them and find the appropriate mix of legal structures to address those issues. Finally, the term organizational structure refers to how decisions are made within the organization, how lines of authority and responsibility are established. The business plan should clearly outline an organizational chart that establishes those lines of authority and responsibility, but even more importantly, provides a framework for how that organizational structure might change over time as the business evolves and as different people become involved in the business, for example. Is one person in charge of everything, and that's the way it will always be, or is decision-making delegated among various stakeholders? Also included in this section of the business plan is a detailed inventory. Just like we inventoried the physical assets, we need an inventory of the people involved in the business. What are their skills and strengths? How much time can they commit to the business, and for how long? Along with this is an assessment of how human resource gaps will be filled over time. Finally, a plan for dealing with human resource emergencies should be clearly spelled out. What happens if someone is suddenly unable or unwilling to do their job, either over the long term or even for just a few days? Again, an important point here is that there are three distinct yet very connected quote-unquote structures that need to be considered in the overall business planning process. Organizational structure refers to who's in charge of what. Legal structure, what rules do we operate under? And financial structure, where do we get the money from? It's important to consider the structures simultaneously in the business planning process, because choices made regarding one type of structure, for example, how the business will be operated from a management control standpoint, can have implications regarding what legal structures are most appropriate to consider, which then in turn have implications for how the business can be funded. All of these things need to be thought of sort of simultaneously in the business planning process. That leads us to the financial component of the overall business plan, if following this particular outline, for example. First, one cannot make a plan for moving forward financially without first knowing where they're currently at financially. A current financial assessment involves, of course, a balance sheet, a summary of everything owned and owed at a particular point in time, an income statement, a summary of revenue and expenses over a period of time to determine profitability or profit potential, a cash flow statement, which is a historical summary of cash inflows and cash outflows to evaluate the business's ability to keep bills paid. Perhaps a statement of change in owner's equity is needed to monitor who owns how much of the business at any point in time as well. Next would be a comprehensive financial evaluation of the plan for the business in the future, over the next year, for example, or over the next several years. This will involve tools such as enterprise budgets, cash flow budgets, and perhaps projections of how the plan will potentially impact whole farm financial statements in the future, or we call them pro forma financial statement projections. If large purchases are a part of the plan moving forward, the financial wisdom of those purchases or alternatives needs to be evaluated using capital investment and capital budgeting tools, for example. The financial section of the business plan will also include a discussion regarding how financial position and progress will be measured and monitored over time. What type of management information system will be put in place, and what tools will be utilized to evaluate the business as it moves forward. Also, stakeholders need to assess and have discussions regarding their capacity and their willingness to take on risk. Multi-stakeholder operations need to reach consensus among individuals on this issue. Otherwise, there's going to be some serious business conflict. Finally, periods of financial stress are a reality in any business. Many are going through that right now in Oklahoma agriculture. Every business needs to think about how they will deal with financially stressful times. Financial structure specifically refers to how much debt versus how much equity financing is used, and where does the debt and equity come from to fund the business. One thing to keep in mind, as indicated earlier when the interactions or interconnections between the various types of structures was first mentioned, is the fact that your choice of structure in one category may impact your choices in other categories. For example, if your business chooses to stay with a traditional sole proprietorship or even a general partnership as the legal structure, that may limit your ability to bring in funding from some potential funding sources. On the other hand, it may open up doors for other sources, all things to be thought about during the business planning process. How you choose to fund your business will depend on several criteria. How much control do you want to maintain over your business? Do you need cash returns now versus investments that may generate long-term returns in the form of capital gains but may generate low levels of cash returns, like a land investment, for example? What are the terms available for acquiring capital? Repayment periods, interest rates, etc. Those are changing all the time. Are there liquidity or repayment capacity issues that need to be considered? Finally, how will choices regarding the funding of the business impact various dimensions of risk exposure? What are the chances that a bad year could seriously impact the business or even the family's financial future? All of these structure interactions should be clearly thought out in the business planning process. Finally, kind of a catch-all category here, for lack of a better term, we'll just call it other things that need to be thought about in the business planning process, it's important to summarize some very specific action steps in the business plan. What are we going to do as a result of going through this business planning exercise at the current time? How will we know if we're succeeding? Are we faced with some big changes in the foreseeable future? And do we need to focus some attention on those specific changes at this point in time in our planning process? For example, bringing a young family member back into the business, coming home from college, for example. Often it is changes of this type on the horizon that stimulate farm families to begin to think about business planning in the first place. Have we thought about how we will handle disruptive events? What bad things could happen, and how likely are those things to happen? What impact would it have on the business, and what can I do to reduce those negative impacts? Several specific components of the overall business plan involve thinking about emergencies. It's important to try to identify the most critical scenarios and think about what can be done to either reduce the probability that that scenario will happen, that bad thing will happen, or reduce the negative impact of it on our business if it does happen. Finally, a business plan is a good place to assemble other important business papers like lease agreements, farm resumes, any other documents that are important to the business. It's just a good handy place to have that information in the 3-ring binder along with your ever-evolving business plan. One thing that I need to spend a few minutes talking about, a very important aspect of the business planning process, is to think about the big picture issues regarding your business and things that will impact your business in the long run. We often refer to this big picture thinking as strategic planning. Strategic planning is just a subcomponent of the overall business planning process. There are day-to-day tactical aspects of business planning, and then there's this big picture thinking stuff that needs to occur. Any comprehensive business plan needs to include a strategic planning component fairly early in the planning process. From the standpoint of the outline that I described earlier, the strategic plan could be included in the executive summary or in the business description, or perhaps as a separate section fairly early in the overall planning process. So let's talk about what strategic planning is all about and provide maybe a few examples to assist in implementing the strategic component of the business planning process. First, let's talk about this thing called vision. A vision statement, as a matter of fact. What is that? And what does one look like? A vision statement is nothing more than a concise summary of what is important to the stakeholders in terms of where the business is headed. It's a dream, but it's a dream that reflects those things that are most important to the various business stakeholders, their core values, if you will. Developing a consensus vision statement for a family business involving a lot of stakeholders is a very difficult task, but a very rewarding exercise, largely because it forces some of that much needed communication among the stakeholder team that we talked about earlier, and it can serve as an exercise to bring that stakeholder team together around a common end point. One way to sum up what a vision statement is all about is that it is a summary of what the business would like to be. One final point about the vision statement: the end product, the statement itself, the written vision statement itself, may not be nearly as important as the ongoing stakeholder discussions regarding what needs to be in that statement. Even if the vision statement product is never actually finalized, the visioning process in and of itself has some tremendous value. Many individuals don't make much of a distinction between a vision statement and a mission statement, and in many cases the two concepts end up being combined into a final joint product called one or the other, a vision statement or a mission statement. Technically, mission is more specific, less future-oriented, and more concerned with what we're all about today. A good summarization would be to say that the mission is more who we are today rather than who we want to be or what we want to be in the future. Again, don't get too hung up on the technical definition or on what the final product or products is ultimately going to be called. The important thing here is to have some ongoing stakeholder discussions about both where we want the business to be in the future and what's really important to us today, so that that thought process becomes ingrained in the overall planning process. So in short, the vision is a collection of thoughts regarding what the business would like to be at some point in the future, while the mission is a collection of thoughts regarding what's really important to business stakeholders today. Whether articulated in two separate statements or combined into a joint summary that includes elements of both and could be called either is not really important. What is important is that the stakeholders have jointly pondered both aspects of vision and aspects of mission. Another strategic issue is goal setting. And it really kind of stems out of the visioning process. Goal setting, though, is a little more tangible concept for most of us to grasp compared to visioning. Perhaps it's because we've all done quite a bit of it. Goal setting is a process of documenting some manageable steps that need to be taken to move our business in the direction that we want to go, our ultimate vision. I like to break the goal setting concept into two distinct categories. Long term, I'll call those objectives, others use different terminology, and short term, I'll just call those short term goals. Written or well documented objectives and goals work. What I mean by that statement is they increase our chance of business success. Reasons why that is true, why written, well-documented goals and objectives work, meaning they increase your chance of success, include the following. They provide information for all stakeholders to help make more informed decisions. They help focus our stakeholder team's attention and actions. They mobilize our energy and our effort toward accomplishing those well-documented goals and objectives. They increase our persistence, our tenacity toward accomplishing those goals and objectives. They encourage the development of good work habits. They provide measurement benchmarks from which to determine whether we are making forward progress, and you can probably think of others. The point is, it is very important that businesses have well-documented and well-discussed goals and objectives. As you think about writing objectives and goals, a couple of acronyms might help to assure that the process is as productive as it can possibly be. We often refer to long-term objectives with the acronym DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E. Accomplishing them will move our business toward the ultimate vision that we have established, so they're directional. It's possible to make this thing happen. It's reasonable. And we as a management team are inspired and positively challenged by this objective. So it's inspiring because we can see the business getting it done, and it will be a good thing when we do get it accomplished. So it's visible. We have a general time frame in mind, usually a few years down the road, but we don't have a specific deadline established for this long-term objective. So it's kind of eventual. It's out there in the future, but not any very specific timeline associated with it. Short-term goals, on the other hand, we often refer to with the acronym SMART. They're very specific, and they have a measurement associated with them, so in the end, we'll be able to tell if we accomplished them or not. We know that it's possible to make this happen, so they're attainable because others have done it, or we're basing that on some other assurance that it can be done in our geographic location, etc. It will make our stakeholder team feel good or proud or satisfied if we accomplish this short-term goal. So it's rewarding. Finally, one of the primary distinctions between a long-term objective, again my terminology, and a short-term goal, again my terminology, is the specific time frame associated with a short-term goal. There is a deadline, a specific time frame, usually within a year, but that might not always be the case, associated with these specific short-term goals. Every long-term objective that stems from the overall long-term vision of the business will have associated with it one or more very specific short-term goals to help move us in that direction. There are a lot more details about business planning than can be adequately covered in this short webinar, but keep the big picture in mind. Agriculture is a very competitive industry, as are many other industries, which means it's a challenge to stay ahead of the competition. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that you have to be on your toes all the time to either be a low per unit cost producer, or you have to figure out a way to sell into a specialty or niche market at some kind of a higher price. Business planning is all about helping you to figure out how to do those things. What is it that I have that sets me apart or will allow me to succeed? Business planning is a mindset, not a one-time event. That's why I always say that a formal written business plan belongs in a 3-ring binder so that various components can be updated or looked at on an ongoing basis. It is a thought process of constantly striving to improve by always thinking about important business management concepts. It's a combination of improving on important day-to-day management decisions and developing a systematic process for thinking about the ever-changing future and the big picture associated with your business. That's about all the time we have today for the formal presentation. I would ask you, number one, to type in any questions that you might have down there in the chat room, and or any comments that you'd like elaborated on, and I'll try to do that. But I'd also remind you to click on the survey link and complete just a very, very brief Qualtrics survey. Also want to remind you of a tremendous quantity, a large quantity of much more detailed resources that are available in a number of places, but we've tried to kind of consolidate a number of those that we think are especially relevant and important on the eFarm Management Training link that is listed there in the slide set, as well as a link you can click on and perhaps bookmark that down there in the chat box. So with that, if there are any questions, I'll be on for just a few more minutes and be happy to address any questions, or you can always contact me at the contact information shown on the first slide there. Thank you for participating in our Farm and Ranch Business Planning webinar today.
I would like to also remind everyone that our next webinar will be over Farm and Ranch benchmarking, and it will be on Tuesday, September 19th, also at noon, the same time as today's webinar. I don't see any questions for Dr. Jones, so thanks again for attending the webinar and filling out this short survey, and we will see you in a couple weeks. Goodbye.